Some places don't exist to be found. They exist to wait. Himuro Mansion is not marked on any map. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was never meant to be remembered. This is not a ghost story. This is a record of a ritual that never truly ended. Listen carefully. And if at any point you feel the urge to turn back, it may already be too late. Chapter 1. The mansion that does not exist on any map. There is no map that leads to Himuro Mansion. Not because it was forgotten, but because no one wants to remember that it exists. In old Japanese land registry archives, among yellowed maps stained by time and war, there is a strange blank space deep within the mountains west of Tokyo. A stretch of forest marked only by a faded line of ink, no name, no notes, no recorded history. When the same area is zoomed in on modern digital maps, satellite signals abruptly fail, as if an unseen hand were covering the sky itself. Those who have tried to reach the place all describe the same experience. At first, the road is clear. The forest is not overly dense. The air is so quiet that the sound of one's own footsteps echoes longer than it should. But the deeper they go, the more time seems to slow. Watches stop ticking. Compasses spin without control. And when they turn back, the road is gone. No one walks straight to Himuro Mansion. The house appears only when it allows itself to be found. The villagers nearby never speak its name. They avoid looking toward the forest after sunset. Children are warned that if they hear the sound of rope dragging in the night, they must pull the blanket over their heads and hold their breath. The elderly, when drunk, sometimes mutter an old name and suddenly begin to cry, unable, or unwilling, to explain why. They call it Himuro K, the house that keeps blood. According to whispered accounts, the mansion was once vast, its corridors so long that someone standing at one end could not see another person at the opposite side. Dark wooden walls, sliding doors covered in pale paper, and at its center, a room that was always locked, a room sunlight had never entered. But what made Himuro Mansion terrifying was not its architecture. It was the feeling of standing near it. No insects. No birds. No wind. The space around the house is unnaturally still, as if the entire forest is holding its breath. Those who wander too close report the same sensation. Their hearts begin to beat out of rhythm, as though something else is counting the pulses for them. After World War II, all official records related to the land were sealed. Soldiers sent to investigate the area never returned. The final report contained only a single line: the structure has collapsed. Yet no ruins were ever found. Because Himuro Mansion did not disappear. It simply waited. And when someone wandered far enough at the right moment, the mansion would reveal itself, quietly opening its doors, as if it had been waiting for that person to come back all along. Chapter 2. The Himuro Clan. The Himuro clan never appeared in official historical records. There are no ancestral graves, no genealogies preserved in national shrines, no documents recognizing them as nobility or clergy. Yet in decaying handwritten manuscripts left behind by Edo period monks, the name Himuro appears, not as a lineage, but as a warning. They were not priests. They were not sorcerers. They were keepers of the fracture. From ancient times, the Japanese believed that the human world and the spirit world were not fully separated. They overlap, intersecting at places where the boundary is thin, deep forests, high mountains, crossroads, and houses built upon land that has already died. Himuro Mansion was one such place, a weakness where the veil between worlds was so fragile it could be torn open by a single misplaced invocation. The Himuro clan existed to ensure that tear never widened. They believed that malevolent entities did not need to be destroyed. They only needed to be fed. No talisman, no sutra, no incantation was powerful enough to restrain what lay beyond. Only human blood, offered through an ancient rite passed down from generation to generation, a ritual whose name was never spoken aloud. The Blood Sacrifice Ritual. Each generation of the Himuro clan produced a child who was marked from birth. There was no physical sign, no birthmark, no deformity, no prophecy carved into flesh, only a chill that ran through the elders when the infant cried for the first time. At that moment, the oldest among them would bow their heads. They knew. A rope maiden had been born. She was not chosen. She was predetermined. Her life was shaped entirely around the ritual. She was forbidden to leave the forest. Forbidden to speak with outsiders. Forbidden to love. Forbidden to dream. The clan believed emotion disrupted the purity of blood and caused the ritual to fail. To them, sacrifice was not cruelty. It was duty. And each time the ritual was completed, the mansion fell silent for decades. The wind returned. Birds returned. The forest breathed again. But in the final years of the Himuro clan, something changed. The monks began recording identical dreams. A girl standing in a windowless room. Red rope coiled around her wrists. Blood dripping onto wooden floors. And behind her, something smiling. They called it the final omen. Because if the ritual were ever performed without absolute submission, then the thing kept starving on the other side. Would no longer accept restraint. And the Himuro clan, once guardians of the boundary, would become the first offering. Chapter 3. The Red Rope. The rope was never meant to bind flesh. It was created to keep the soul from escaping. In the deepest ritual chamber of Himuro Mansion, where sunlight had never reached, the elders kept a black wooden chest. It had no lock, no seal, yet no one dared to open it without permission. The clan believed that opening it at the wrong time would cause whatever lay inside to begin breathing. The red rope lay coiled within, like a sleeping creature. Its color was not bright red, but the dark, dried crimson of old blood, the kind of color that appears only after blood has forgotten the body it once belonged to. The rope was woven from human hair, the hair of previous maidens, mixed with wild fibers and soaked in sacrificial animal blood. It was then exposed to moonlight for 49 consecutive nights, absorbing a light that did not belong to the sun. The Himuro called it the Shimenawa of the dead. Those who touched the rope never felt pain, but their hearts grew cold. A hollow sensation crawled along the spine, as if someone were whispering their name from a great distance. Everyone who had held it reported the same thing. They heard breathing, not their own. Before the ritual, the rope maiden was led into the central chamber, a room with no windows, no mirrors, no clocks. There, she was forced to kneel for 3 days and 3 nights without food, without water, without sleep. This was not to weaken the body, but to empty the soul, making it easier to keep once the moment arrived. The rules of the ritual were carved into wood and hung on the chamber wall. Do not cry. Tears dilute the blood. Do not scream. A scream invites what must not come. And above all, do not love. Because love creates a rope stronger than any ritual binding. At the moment of sacrifice, the rope was wrapped around the maiden's wrists, ankles, and finally her neck. It was never pulled tight, only firm enough to hold. Blood was not allowed to flow too quickly. Everything had to occur in absolute silence, so the soul would not realize it was being restrained. The Himuro believed that if a soul departed without realizing it had died, it would become the perfect lock for the boundary between worlds. But in the final years, the rope began to change. It grew heavier, colder, and sometimes it moved on its own. One elder recorded in his journal, "Last night, I heard the sound of rope dragging across the floor. Though no one was in the chamber, the rope is hungry." They failed to understand the truth. The ritual did not merely restrain what lay beyond. It fed it. And with every offering of blood, the thing sealed on the other side learned something new about humanity, how humans suffer, how they fear, and how they love. Over time, the red rope ceased to be a tool. It became will. And by the time the final rope maiden of the Himuro clan was born, the rope was no longer waiting to be wrapped. It had begun to search for its own keeper. Chapter 4. The Last Girl. Itsuki Himuro was born on a night without a moon. No one in the clan could recall the exact moment of her first cry. They only remembered that when it happened, the wind in the forest suddenly fell silent, as if something had lifted its head to listen. One elder dropped the teacup in his hands. Another began murmuring a prayer never meant for newborns. There was nothing unusual about Itsuki's body. No missing fingers. No strange birthmarks. No unnatural gaze. Yet everyone who held her felt the same thing. This child does not belong to the world beyond the gate. From the moment she learned to walk, Itsuki never left the forest. She grew up inside Himuro Mansion as though she were part of the house itself, her footsteps so light they made no sound. Her breathing blending seamlessly into the stillness. She learned to recite ancient prayers before she learned common writing. She was taught to kneel for hours without shifting, to control her heartbeat through breath alone. They did not call it training. They called it preparation. Itsuki was forbidden to look into mirrors. The elders believed that if the rope maiden saw herself too clearly, her soul would begin to ask questions, and questions could fracture the ritual. So her room contained no mirrors, no windows, only a muted light seeping in from the hallway, enough to see the wooden floor but not enough to see the future. She did not know she had been chosen. The Himuro never lied. They simply never spoke the truth aloud. Itsuki was told that one day she would serve the clan, that it was the greatest honor she could achieve, that all those before her had done the same and brought peace to the forest. No one used the word death. No one said sacrifice. Those words were considered impure. But Itsuki began to dream. In her dreams, she stood inside the windowless room. The red rope floated before her, swaying gently though there was no wind. Beneath the floorboards came a faint knocking, as if something on the other side were asking to be let in. Each time she reached for the rope, her heart beat faster, as though it recognized her before she recognized herself. Once, she woke to find faint red marks around her wrists, like the impression of a rope that had just been removed. She never asked anyone about it, because in the eyes of the adults, she always saw something heavier than affection, a cold acceptance, as if they had known her ending long before she ever did. Itsuki Himuro was not the first rope maiden, but she was the first to feel the rope reaching for her, long before it ever touched her. And that alone was enough to begin cracking the ritual. From the very moment she was born. Chapter 5, The Betrayal. No one in the Himuro clan believed the rope maiden could betray them. They believed betrayal only existed where choice existed. And Itsuki, they thought, had none. Her life had been decided the moment she first cried. There were no alternate paths, no deviations, no future to compare against the one prepared for her. And because of that, they failed to guard against the most dangerous thing of all. Love. He appeared on a thin rained afternoon, when mountain mist sank so low the forest seemed to dissolve into itself. A stranger, injured, exhausted, collapsed near the edge of the woods surrounding Himuro Mansion. By clan law, outsiders were forbidden to cross the boundary. Itsuki was the first to see him. She had never seen eyes like his before. Not cold, not reverent, only human fear, and the desperate will to live. She hid him in an old storage shed, shielding him from the elders' sight. Each day, she brought water and food, slipping through the endless hallways without a sound. And within that silence, for the first time in her life, Itsuki felt her heart move for a reason unrelated to ritual. He told her about the outside world, roads with names, houses with windows open to sunlight, people who lived without offering blood. She listened like someone hearing a fairy tale, torn between terror and longing. She did not know that each time her heart wavered, the red rope in the ritual chamber tightened ever so slightly. That night, Itsuki dreamed of the rope stained a different shade, not the dark red of dried blood, but bright crimson, fresh and alive. When she awoke, her throat burned, as though she had screamed in her sleep. Along the hallway floor stretched a faint drag mark, leading toward the ritual chamber. The elders began to sense something was wrong. The ritual date was near, yet the rope no longer lay obedient. It grew heavier, more resistant. During prayers, the wind did not return. The birds did not come back. The forest did not breathe. They began to watch Itsuki. And for the first time, doubt entered their eyes. On the night before the ritual, the secret was uncovered. The boy was dragged from the shed, his wrists bound. Itsuki was pulled into the ritual chamber and forced to kneel before the red rope, now trembling like a living thing. In that moment, the truth the clan had hidden from her finally revealed itself. She had not been born to live. She had been born to seal the gate. When the ritual began, Itsuki failed at the one thing that mattered most. She cried. Her tears struck the wooden floor. At a forbidden point, the rope convulsed violently. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber. Soft, but enough to shatter centuries of silence. The red rope snapped. And on the other side of the boundary, something realized, for the first time, that it was no longer being starved. Chapter 6. The Night of Blood. There was no thunder. No warning. Only absolute silence fell over Himuro Mansion at the exact moment the red rope snapped. The candles in the ritual chamber went out all at once, as if someone had blown from inside the walls. Darkness did not spread, it collapsed. Heavy and suffocating, the elders standing in the circle felt their knees weaken, not from fear, but because the ground beneath them was trembling faintly, like the heartbeat of something enormous that had just awakened. The first sound was not a scream. It was dragging. The dry rasp of rope scraping across wooden floors. Slow and deliberate, moving from the deepest hallway toward the ritual chamber. No one could see the rope, yet everyone felt it approaching, wrapping around ankles, wrists, throats, by a force that could not be resisted. The first to fall bore no wounds. He simply froze in place, eyes wide, mouth open as if begging. Then his body was pulled upside down toward the ceiling, twisted into an angle no human body could hold. There was no blood, only the sound of joints forced into impossible positions, cracking like breaking branches. Then the house began to breathe. Hallways stretched longer. Sliding doors opened into rooms that had never existed. The wooden floors rippled like water. And from beneath them, unseen hands began to knock, not to escape, but to count. The Himuro clan died in silence. No one had time to scream. No one had time to run. Each was dragged in a different direction, as if the house had memorized the precise location of every soul within it. Blood finally appeared, not sprayed, not splattered, but guided carefully along grooves already carved into the wood, as if the floors had been designed long ago to receive it. The ritual chamber alone remained still. Itsuki knelt there, the broken rope at her feet, hands trembling, throat locked tight. She heard her clan die, one by one, yet she could not turn around. Because behind her, there was another breath, very close. Not warm, not cold, just familiar. When she turned, the room had changed. Dozens of red ropes hung from the ceiling, suspended without anchors, swaying gently as if greeting her. Beneath her, the blood had completed a perfect circle, the final ritual, finishing itself. Itsuki understood too late. The ritual had not failed. It had merely changed its keeper. By dawn, the forest was silent again. No birds. No wind. Himuro Mansion stood untouched, pristine, showing no sign of the massacre that had erased an entire clan overnight. The Himuro vanished from history in a single night. And in the windowless room, a girl still stood, her hand resting on a new red rope, listening as the house whispered her name. Chapter 7. The Rope Room. After the night the Himuro clan vanished, there was one room in the mansion that never changed. No matter how the hallways stretched into impossible lengths, no matter how sliding doors opened into spaces that should not exist, that room remained at the center, windowless, lightless, without escape. It came to be known by many names, but the one that endured was the rope room. The ceiling was filled with red ropes. There were no hooks, no nails. They hung suspended in the air, dangling like waiting necks. When no one was present, the ropes were still. But the moment a footstep touched the wooden floor, they began to sway, very gently, as if reacting like living things that had sensed prey. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of old metal. Not the smell of fresh blood, but of blood that had flowed too many times, soaked too deeply into the wood to ever be washed away. Those who stood at the threshold all reported the same thing, the sound of breathing right beside their ears. Even when the room was empty. And always, a woman's voice whispered the same words, over and over. "I'm still waiting." Itsuki never left that room. Not because she was imprisoned, but because she could not go far. Each time she stepped into the hallway, the space warped and bent, drawing her back to the center. The house did not allow the keeper of the ritual to stray from its heart. Time did not move there. Day never grew brighter. Night never grew darker. Itsuki did not age. She did not breathe like the living. But she was not dead either. Her soul was bound by the very ritual the Himuro had created, a ritual that now had no master but her. At first, she tried to count. She carved marks into the wooden floor, each one corresponding to a time she heard footsteps outside the room. But the marks began to overlap. The footsteps no longer followed any pattern. Sometimes they sounded human, sometimes they dragged, slow, heavy, unmistakably familiar. The ropes began to move on their own. They did not tighten around Itsuki's neck. They did not cause pain. They only touched her, as reminders that she was still here. That the ritual continued, even without new blood being offered. Some nights, Itsuki heard crying. Not the voices of her clan. Not the voice of the man she loved. But the voices of those who had not yet arrived. The room began to learn how to call. It whispered into the dreams of those who wandered too close to the forest. It bent maps, disrupted signals, pulled roads a little nearer, one step at a time, and each time someone drew too close, the ropes in the room trembled softly, like instruments already tuned, waiting for a hand to touch them. Itsuki came to understand the most horrifying truth of all. The Himuro clan believed they had created a ritual to protect the world. But in reality, they had built a trap that required someone to remain forever. And now, she was the one who remained. The keeper of the room. The listener of footsteps. The one who waited. Because the ritual had never ended. It was only searching for the next person to enter. Chapter 8, The Missing. The first official file appeared in 1972. A freelance journalist named Morita Shun, known for investigating locations erased from post-war maps, vanished during a 3-day assignment in the mountains west of Tokyo. Police later found his car parked along a forest road. The driver's door was open. The keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. Only a cassette recorder lay on the passenger seat. In the final seconds of the tape, Morita's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something is pulling, but I can't see the rope." After that, the disappearances followed a pattern. Every few years, someone else vanished. A folklore researcher. An architecture student studying abandoned estates. Urban explorers. Ghost hunters. People convinced they were too rational to be affected. They all had one thing in common. They were looking for Himuro Mansion. None of the missing were ever found. But almost all of them left behind a final trace, a photograph. A hastily written note, a short video uploaded or sent moments before contact was lost, as if they knew they were running out of time. In those images, one recurring detail terrified investigators enough that it was never released to the public. A long wooden corridor. Dim light. And at the far end of the frame, a figure in a white kimono. No photograph ever captured her face. Her features were always obscured by hair, shadow, or simply absence. Image analysts later noticed something stranger still. The figure did not reflect light the way a human body should. She appeared less like a person and more like a void cut into the photograph. One university student sent an email to his friends shortly before vanishing. He wrote that the map application on his phone kept changing, the road ahead repeating itself even after more than an hour of walking. In the final line, he typed only this: "She's standing in the rope room." No one understood what the rope room meant until the few survivors began to speak. A middle-aged man was found wandering the edge of the forest in a dissociated state. He claimed he had seen a room filled with ropes hanging in midair. He said a girl stood at the center, unmoving, unblinking, and when he turned to flee, he heard her voice right behind his ear. "Don't make me wait too long." All of the cases were officially ruled accidents, disappearances, or voluntary desertions. The name Himuro Mansion never appeared in mainstream media. Forum threads were deleted, videos vanished, articles were locked without explanation. But within private communities, the legend continued to spread. They said Himuro Mansion did not hunt indiscriminately. It only called to those who had already seen too much. The curious. The skeptical. Those who believed they were merely observers. Because once you know about it, once you imagine the rope room, a part of you is already standing very close to the threshold. And there, in the windowless room, Itsuki still stood, listening to footsteps drawing nearer, knowing that sooner or later, someone would walk far enough to never turn back again. Chapter 9. The Narrator. I did not believe in curses. I believed in things that could be verified, sealed records, edited tapes, photographs erased from servers without a trace. When too many things disappear in the same way, it stops being coincidence, it becomes concealment. Himuro Mansion was the name that surfaced repeatedly in every disappearance I investigated. It never appeared on maps. It had no precise coordinates. Yet it was always there, like a deliberate blank space someone had chosen not to fill. I went alone. Not out of bravery, but because I knew that if someone came with me, one of us would turn back too early. And I needed to go all the way, to understand what had taken everyone before me without leaving a trace. At first, the forest road was ordinary, wide enough for a car, old tire marks still visible. But after 15 minutes, my phone lost all signal. The GPS froze, then began to spin. I turned around to check. The road behind me was still there, but it felt farther away than it should have been. The air thickened. There were no insects, no birds, only the sound of my own footsteps, except they didn't sound like mine. Heavier, slower, as if someone else were walking in the same rhythm. Then I saw it. Himuro Mansion did not appear suddenly. It separated itself from the forest, slowly, like a memory being recalled. Dark wooden walls, endless corridors, closed sliding doors. The building was not ruined. It was maintained, too intact for a structure officially declared collapsed after the war. I stood before the gate for a long time. Not because I was afraid, but because of a strange sensation, like I had stood there before. Long ago, only without remembering when. When I placed my hand on the door, the wood felt colder than it should have been. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of something that had not required warmth in a very long time. The door opened before I pushed it. A dark hallway stretched inward, long enough that I could not see where it ended. The wooden floor was unnaturally clean. No dust, no cobwebs, as if someone still swept it regularly, or as if the house did it itself. When I stepped inside, the door closed behind me. Silently. I turned and tried to open it. It wasn't locked, but it no longer led to the forest. Behind me was another hallway. And far down that hallway, I saw a figure standing still. She did not move. She did not turn. But I knew, with unsettling certainty, that she was waiting for me. And for the first time since beginning my investigation, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I was not the first person to enter Himuro Mansion believing I was only an observer. And if the stories were true, I might not be the last. Chapter 10. The Mirror. I sensed the presence of the mirror before I ever saw it. Not because of reflection, but because of the feeling of being watched. Not the sensation of someone standing behind you, but of something observing you from inside your own thoughts, reading your smallest movements before you even make them. The mirror stood at the end of the third hallway. No frame, no border, just a dark, rectangular plane embedded into the wooden wall like a wound cut into reality. My flashlight did not reflect off its surface. The beam vanished, swallowed whole, leaving the glass darker than the surrounding shadows. I stood before it and did not see myself. Instead, I saw the hallway behind me. But not the one I had just walked through. It was longer, narrower, and at the far end of the reflected corridor stood a sliding door I was certain did not exist in the house. When I tilted my head, the image in the mirror responded a fraction of a second later. Not much. Just enough to notice. My heart began to pound. I raised my hand, and in the mirror, my reflection lifted its hand one beat after mine, as if it needed time to decide whether it should obey. Then I saw her. Not behind me, but inside the mirror. Itsuki stood there, directly behind my reflected image, close enough to reach, yet absent from the physical space around me. She wore a white kimono, aged and worn, its hem stained a dark, dried red. Her long hair veiled most of her face. Only her lips were visible, pressed together as if restraining words that had been held back for far too long. I did not turn around. Because I had already learned one of the house's rules. If you turn to confirm something, you will confirm the wrong reality. Itsuki smiled. And when she did, my reflection began to change. The mirror no longer showed what I was doing. It showed what I was about to do. I saw my reflected hand reach out and touch the mirror's surface, while my real hand remained still. I saw my lips part and speak words I had not yet thought. How long have you been waiting? The surface of the mirror rippled. Not cracking. Not breaking. But trembling like water touched gently from the other side. Itsuki moved closer within the reflection. I felt her breath, cold, thin, unmistakable, brush against the back of my neck in the real world. She whispered, and this time I heard it not just with my ears, but through my bones. Longer than you think. I stepped back. The reflection stepped forward. And I finally understood the true function of mirrors inside Himuro Mansion. They do not reflect the living. They locate them. They tell the house exactly where you stand between the two worlds, and how far you have already leaned toward the other side. When I turned and ran, I did not hear footsteps behind me, but I heard the mirror whisper softly, like a door being opened just a little. Chapter 11, The Unfinished Ritual. I found the ritual chamber after running through 3 hallways that never led to the same place twice. Each turn rearranged the house's internal order, as if it were testing how much contradiction I could accept before breaking. When the final sliding door opened, the smell of old metal hit my throat so sharply it burned. The scent of blood that had flowed too often, for too long, and had never been allowed to fade. The chamber was empty. No altar. No candles. No talismans. Only a circle carved deep into the wooden floor, wide enough for a single person to stand within. The grooves overlapped and crossed, forming narrow channels, like a map designed to guide blood exactly where it was meant to go. I immediately saw what was wrong. The circle was not closed. A small segment was misaligned, so subtle it would escape a casual glance. Yet that tiny break was enough to prevent the ritual from ever reaching completion. Like a prayer cut off mid-sentence, insufficient to seal the gate, but enough to keep it perpetually ajar. Itsuki's voice came from behind me. Not whispered. Not echoed. Simply present, as if she had always been standing there. They believed the ritual ended when the rope held the soul, she said, but they were wrong. I did not turn around. I studied the broken circle, piecing together everything I had seen, the rope, the mirrors, the central chamber, into a logic I could barely endure. What does the ritual need? I asked. It needs the will to remain, Itsuki replied. Not the clans, not the officiants, but the one being held. She told me what the Himuro clan had never recorded. Each sacrifice required the rope maiden to accept death without resentment, without fear, without regret. Only when the soul willingly chose to stay could it become a perfect lock. But that had never happened. The maidens before Itsuki had obeyed, not consented. And so the ritual had produced only temporary locks. Every temporary lock decayed with time. That's why the house keeps calling, she said. That's why it needs replacements. I cried, Itsuki said softly, not because I feared death, but because I wanted to live. The circle beneath my feet trembled, not physically, but spatially, like an old wound being pressed. I couldn't finish the ritual, she continued, but I couldn't leave either. I finally understood why Himuro Mansion never collapsed. It waited. It waited for a soul willing to stay, fully aware of the cost, to seal the broken segment of the circle. It waited for someone who understood enough to know what they were giving up, and still stepped into the center. Why me? I asked, my voice hoarse. Itsuki was silent for a long moment. Because you've gone far enough that you can no longer say you didn't know, she said, and because you're still here. When I looked down, my chest tightened. I was standing very close to the center of the circle. And the rope, I didn't know when it had arrived, was already there, resting lightly against my wrist. Cold as an invitation that could not be taken back. Chapter 12. The rope around the neck. The rope was so cold that I didn't realize it was touching my skin until my heartbeat began to slow. Not the sharp cold that makes you flinch, but a deep, seeping chill, one that crept along the spine and weighed down every thought. As if each idea needed permission to exist. I looked down at my wrist. The red rope had already coiled around it at some point. Loose, not tight, just enough to remind me that I had stepped within its reach. Don't resist. Itsuki's voice came from close enough that I could feel her breath brush my ear. It doesn't like being refused. I swallowed. If I step into the center of the circle, will it end? She didn't answer right away. In that silence, the house let out a low, almost imperceptible groan, like old wood tightening as the weather changes. Far away, hallways shifted, sliding doors opened and closed in a slow, steady rhythm, like the breathing of a massive body. It will be calm, Itsuki said at last, not finished, just calm. The rope slid higher. To my neck. It touched my skin so lightly that, if I closed my eyes, I could almost convince myself it wasn't real. But my throat began to dry, as if the air itself had thinned. I understood another rule of Himuro Mansion then. It doesn't need force. It only needs to be close enough for you to adjust your breathing to it. I took half a step forward. The circle beneath my feet made a faint click, so small it could have been imagined, like a final piece slipping into place. The carved grooves in the floor darkened, though no blood was spilled. The ritual was happening without blades. Without chance. With presence alone. I thought of the missing. Of the corridor photographs. Of the mirror that refused to reflect the living. They had never been meant to terrify. They had been warnings. Preparations. You're not offering your life, Itsuki said, her voice no longer whispered. You're offering time. I turned to look at her for the first time. Her face was clearer than I expected, younger, and worn in a way only those who have waited too long can be. The faint marks of the rope still lingered around her wrists. She looked at me not like someone persuading, but like someone who knew I already understood. How long? I asked. Itsuki smiled, a smile without joy. Until someone else goes far enough. The rope tightened, just a little. Not enough to hurt, but enough to tell me that if I stepped out of the circle now, it wouldn't drag me back. It would remember me. And being remembered by the house was worse than staying. I drew a deep breath, and realized that breathing had become easier when I stood still. That was the most terrifying moment of all. The moment I understood that my body was learning how to adapt to being held. Chapter 13. The crying beneath the floor. The first sound was not crying. It was the faint creak of old wood bending, barely audible, like a sigh that had been held back for far too long. I felt it through the soles of my feet, rising to my knees, then settling in my chest, where the rope was keeping my heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of the house. Don't look down, Itsuki said. If you see it too clearly, you won't have a choice anymore. I looked anyway. A floorboard in front of me lifted slightly, just enough to open a narrow black seam. There was no stench of rot, no dampness, only the sharp, metallic scent of old blood, stronger here than anywhere else in the mansion. And from that opening, the crying began. Not a single voice, but many, layered across time. The cries of children, of women, of men. Each sob was frozen at its final moment, never allowed to resolve. Together they formed a broken chorus, a song that had lost its conductor long ago. I knelt, hands shaking, and pushed the board wider. There was no soil beneath the floor. There were bones. Dozens, no, hundreds, of skeletons stacked with inhuman precision. Every set of wrists was bound, some ankles as well, and every skull, without exception, was turned in the same direction. Toward the rope room. I recognized the familiar indentations on the wrist bones, the marks left by the red rope. Not all of them had been rope maidens. Not all belonged to the Himuro clan. Some skeletons were smaller, more fragile, wanderers, seekers, those who had gone too far. The ritual had never taken only one life per generation. It took whoever was necessary to keep the gate from tearing fully open. They told you this was sacrifice, Itsuki said behind me, her voice stripped of sorrow. But really, it's storage. Each soul held beneath the floor became a temporary patch for the broken segment of the circle. And as each patch wore thin over time, the house demanded more, not out of cruelty, but because it had been built to function this way. The crying swelled, then cut off at once, as if someone had raised a hand for silence. The rope around my neck trembled. I understood that if I stayed, the cries would never vanish. They would only soften, suppressed just enough for the outside world to keep turning without noticing. What about the others? I asked. The ones who come after me. Itsuki did not look down into the pit of bones. She stared straight ahead, toward the endless hallway. They won't see what you saw, she said, unless you let them. That was when I understood my true role was not to be a sacrifice. It was to be the gatekeeper. The one who decides who is allowed to see the truth. And who hears only a distant call in the forest. And turns back in time. I slid the floorboard back into place. The crying was severed. The floor became seamless, as though it had never been opened. And in the silence that returned, I knew I had taken another step, not toward the center of the circle, but toward the true nature of the ritual. Chapter 14. The Replacement. I didn't notice the change right away. There was no violent moment. No flash of light. No scream. Only a series of small things, so subtle that, without attention, they could be dismissed as exhaustion. I stood in the ritual chamber longer without my legs aching. My breathing grew steadier when the rope tightened slightly. And when I stepped out of the circle, the house did not resist. That was the most frightening part. Himuro Mansion began to adjust to me, the way it adjusted its hallways and mirrors. The sensation was like learning a new habit, strange at first, then familiar, and eventually invisible. I realized I could hear more, not sounds, but intent. Footsteps in the forest no longer felt like noise, they carried weight. Some turned back early, some advanced out of curiosity, and some walked far enough for the house to open its doors. Itsuki stood beside me, but the distance between us had changed. She was no longer the sole keeper. She became a living memory of the ritual, a reminder of what happens when consent is broken. I, by understanding and remaining, began to fill the gap the circle required. I saw it in minor details. The rope no longer searched for me with hunger, it waited with patience. The mirrors stopped resisting. The reflections moved in time with me. The hallways shortened, not for me, but for others. I tried to leave the mansion. No one stopped me. The doors opened. The forest was there, real, breathing. But the moment I stepped across the threshold, the air grew heavy, each step bending into something like a broken promise. I understood then that I could leave. But the house would leave with me. And out there, without walls to contain it, without a circle to calm it, it would have no restraint. I turned back before that happened. That was the last choice I made that still resembled freedom. Itsuki looked at me, and for the first time there was something like relief in her eyes. "You see now," she said, "that's enough." I nodded, not in agreement, but in acceptance of responsibility. From that day on, the crying beneath the floor grew faint. Not gone, just farther away. Like the tide retreating as something shifts. The house became quieter, not because it was satisfied, but because it was guided. I learned how to close doors before they were opened, how to blur maps, how to let the curious hear the call just long enough, then turn back. Replacement was not the handing over of a key. It was becoming the lock. And at night, standing in the rope room, I understood what the Himuro clan never had time to learn. The ritual never needed someone to die. It needed someone to stay, and know when to say no. Chapter 15. The house is still waiting. They say Himuro Mansion collapsed after a minor earthquake that was never officially recorded. The forest in western Tokyo was temporarily sealed off. When survey teams were sent in, they found nothing but fallen trees, loose soil, and a strange blank space where old maps vaguely marked a structure. No broken timber, no foundation, no sign that a house had ever stood there. The report concluded, "Area unsafe, no artificial structures detected." They were right. Himuro Mansion was never a structure. It was a state. Since I stayed, the outside world has grown quieter. There are no more loud disappearances. No more corridor photographs circulating in hidden forums. Those who wander the forest sometimes hear a faint calling, but most turn back early. Hearts racing, carrying the uneasy sense that they have narrowly avoided something. I learned how to close the house. Not with doors. Not with ropes. But with presence. Whenever someone comes too close, I feel it, like a subtle pressure in my chest. The way the air shifts before weather changes. I adjust the paths. I let the fog fall thicker. I tilt compasses just enough. Enough for them to get lost. Enough for them to believe they made a mistake. Itsuki is still here. She no longer stands at the center of the rope room. She exists in fragments, within dim mirrors. In the quiet creak of floorboards. In the brief chill that brushes past when I walk the halls. She is no longer waiting. She is witnessing. Did we do the right thing? I once asked. She did not answer. But for the first time since I arrived, the house was silent in a way that felt relieved. Sometimes, someone still goes far enough. People like who I used to be. Those who don't believe. Those who need to see for themselves. For them, the house reveals itself, imperfect, incomplete, like a half-buried memory. I show them just enough to make them stop. And if they don't, I let them see the wooden floor, the long hallways, and the faint sound of dragging, just enough for them to turn back while they still can. Because I learned the final truth of the ritual. Himuro Mansion is not evil. It does not understand boundaries. It was built to hold. And it will hold whatever is placed into its care. The Himuro clan gave it blood. I gave it awareness. If you are reading this and feel a chill pass through your spine, don't worry, that doesn't mean the house is calling you. It only means you've heard the story. But if one day you lose your way in the forest, lose your signal, and realize the path behind you no longer looks the way it did when you entered. If you hear the faint sound of dragging on wooden floors, even though there is only dirt and leaves around you, do not turn around. Keep walking until the sound fades. Because if Himuro Mansion appears before you, whole, silent, and opening its doors as if it has known you for a very long time, then it means that someone inside did not manage to close it in time. And then, the house will no longer be waiting for me. It will be waiting for you. Himuro Mansion did not disappear. It only learned how to stay quiet. If this story lingers with you longer than it should, if you feel as though something is listening as you close your eyes, don't be afraid. Just don't go looking for the house. Because some doors are only closed as long as no one tries to open them. And once they do, the house will be waiting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.